Hi, good afternoon, Jill. Good to see
Hey,
you.
Melissa.
We are here today because we decided after a couple conversations since post-COVID that we wanted to chat a little bit about what our clients have been talking about over the past kind of weeks and months. Both of us are business coaches and we specialize in different arenas, which I'll let you tell us a little bit more about your business and what brought you to business coaching. But we're going to talk today a little bit about kind of that new lens, what businesses and brands and entrepreneurs can start thinking about in terms of the conversations that we're having today for the future. I'm sure much like you, I've watched a lot of your content recently, getting as much data and information from what is out there, but having these like really high level conversations about, like I said, what we could be planning for the future based on what we know from the past. And so I'm Melissa Anderson. I'm founder of Boxtheoutside Coaching and Consulting. I specialize in working with creative brands and entrepreneurs and leaders, mostly on optimizing revenue generation, identifying people opportunities, and creating longevity and sustainability in their businesses. So thanks for being on with me today. Tell us a little bit about you, Jill.
I'm Jill James. I'm the CEO and founder of Sif Industries. Our focus is helping creative and non-managerial founders, particularly female founders, make that leap from being a first-time founder to being a CEO. So we focus in on strategic planning, financial stability, operations management, but really just moving you through those gaps of things that you don't know when you start a business and come from more of a creative or non-managerial background, helping you fill in that side of the business so that you can focus on your customers, on your product, on your services, and really building your community rather than the nuts and bolts of compliance and operations and financial reports and fun stuff like that I like to do, but maybe a lot of other people don't.
Yeah, I love that. So Jill, tell us a little bit more about your background. What brought you to become a coach and specialize in kind of working with small brands and emerging businesses in terms of their financial futures?
Yeah. So after I went to business school, I switched from being in finance to being in startups. And I've been in about 6 startups. The last was, I was COO of a technology-enabled matchmaking company here in LA. I had realized like I had supported a couple of founders who were of the background that I work with now, and really stepped in of like the running the company part of it. And when I was pregnant with my son, I realized like the venture-backed startup world was always going to demand 80 hours or nothing from me. So I had a couple of kind of peer executives who, had their own businesses, and they said, we see what you have done. And if you would do it for us, like on a part-time or contract basis, like we'd be happy to have you and be flexible about it. So I decided to start this business. And originally it was just kind of my job, but on a contracting basis. But really about a year into it, I started to see commonality of the companies I was working with and the challenges that they were having. And I wanted to solve more of those. And so my real, reason for being in business the last 3 years has been, how do I help more and more people who kind of had that oops, I started a business moment, right? Where they just wanted to be out on their own, or they had an idea, like, how do we turn that into a real business, right? How do I make that accessible for as many people as I can? And you get a lot of those tools if you're in the venture world, right? There are accelerators and there are programs for you, and you get, all of these resources from your portfolio that isn't there for small businesses, and kind of that training and thinking. So I really have refocused around that, and I've really enjoyed working with self-funded founders for the last 3 years. And just, it's really fulfilling to see them find a sustainable path for their businesses and be able to pay them what they want, build their communities. And that's really the basis for what I do now.
Yeah, amazing. And we've actually even worked simultaneously with mutual clients because we both specialize in different arenas. To Jill's point, she helps come in and help you plan all your financials and become that CEO that you're hoping to become, and plan what that could look like and build the roadmaps for that. Whereas I specialize in building more of your revenue generation strategy, business development, doing some organizational and leadership development. I spent 20 years in the fashion industry, more specifically working my way up from New York to LA. I've done everything from product development and design and marketing and merchandising to wholesale sales, and also became an executive for brands like Tom's Footwear, and then also owns a yoga apparel. So I took all that expertise over years and years of like working my way through brands, inside of brands, looking externally at the right retail partners and wholesale partners throughout the industry. I also was at WGSN Trend Forecasting for a short stint here in Los Angeles. And so taking all that knowledge capital and realizing it was about circa 2016 that I wanted to help, like you, emerging brands and businesses navigate the current landscape. It looked so different circa to the post 2010 than it did prior to that. So how to help brands and businesses come into this new arena where e-commerce was king and traditional retail was kind of slowly declining, as well as wholesale partnerships, and the whole landscape changed. So I really help businesses, create new solutions for today's current marketplace. And then ultimately, I really love working with the people part. I became a certified professional coach in 2018. And so I also help those entrepreneurs, those executive leaders, even individual contributors, find optimization in what they do on the day-to-day basis, and then additionally build more sustainable strategies for longevity. So that's why we're here. Good. So today we're going to do a little bit of like a Q&A. I'm going to ask you a few questions that around dialogues we've had in the past. So I'll get us started off first and foremost with, you chatted a little bit about leaving your corporate career to launch your own financial coaching business a couple years ago. So as a former COO for incubators and startups, what do you think the number one thing that is on brands' minds right now? And when it comes to the future of their businesses, what could they be thinking about in terms of this time of uncertainty?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one because, a lot of people didn't have a plan before and maybe didn't have a good grasp on what the fundamentals of their business were. But, the market was good enough that you kind of eke out enough money, pay yourself enough, right? It was kind of working. So I think the hardest part that I see with companies right now is if you didn't have some kind of foundation, right, of this is what I expect from this business, this is what my operating budget is, and this is how much I'm going to invest in these things, right? It's really hard right now to know, like, do you do more? Do you do less? Was what you were doing before even working? Right? So that's a hard question to answer right now when you don't have that kind of footing and foundation of something of like, I knew this was working and this wasn't. Maybe this is a good opportunity to let that other thing go. Right? So I think that is like the number one challenge right now of how do you plan when you're not sure what's going to happen and you don't have any basis to plan from before. So, one of the things that I've really been working on with people is just getting a firm grasp on like, what is your operating budget rather than just look at, when this money comes in, I cover this person's salary. And when this money comes in, I cover this person's salary, right? How do we systematically look at like, what do you have to do as a business? What do you have to spend money on? What do you need to spend money on? And then how much revenue do you have coming in against that? And then getting out of the matching up like, this contract pays for this person and this contract pays for this person, so that you suddenly are like, that contract isn't there anymore. I guess I have to let that person go, right? That may be a terrible decision for your business because, they weren't actually the only person working on that, but mentally you've made that connection of that money pays for that person, so they go together. So I think it's challenging to think about like what the staffing is and what you should spend on inventory and what should you do for marketing right now if you don't have at least some foundational understanding of what your overall operating budget is to make those decisions.
Absolutely, which kind of lends to the next question. We talked a little bit about the financial runway, as you called it, that brands ask you to help them predict for the future health of their business and for scaling. So can you share more insight into kind of what a healthy brand DNA looks like to survive this global pandemic?
Yeah. So, the first thing is like just kind of getting a handle on those costs and figuring out like what is core and essential to your business. What do you have to do right now? And also if there are any opportunities for you, right? I see too many people kind of looking at like, I read this thing that said the first people to go should be sales. So let me get rid of my salesperson. And I'm like,
Sure.
well, how are you going to make money? Are you good at sales? Who's going to sell your stuff? So you still need revenue. So, looking at like I think for brands is like looking at like what's going to scale back versus what is somebody else's playbook say about what do you do first, second, and third under these circumstances. But really like thinking through like, where do you think you're going to be in 3 months, in 6 months, in 12 months, right? What's the impact on your buyer, on your consumer? Like, are they going to be 25% down? Are they 50% down? Are they 75% down? Right. And then making some plans around that if we're down 75%, right, we can cover this. But at the same time, maybe there's something else we want to get into. Maybe we should keep a couple of people so that they can work on that. So, what I encourage brands to do right now is not be 100% about cost cutting, but about balancing your risk and your opportunity, so that you're not getting rid of everything that make your brand what it is and the people who are going to move you forward in the future, and just have the people who are really good at managing budgets.
Absolutely. Ironically, about 2 weeks ago actually a couple of weeks ago, I got a ton of phone calls from salespeople because I do a lot of recruitment for businesses and brands. As we build their strategy, we hire the teams in, and it is sad to say, but I think one of the first divisions to go is sales and marketing, just depending on kind of which channel that you focus on the most. So tell me a little bit, we talked about symptomatic pain points.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked a little bit about, what should brands potentially be looking for as they plan for those, you said 3, 6, 9 months in advance, and in creating those like kind of future operational opportunities for themselves. What would your recommendation be?
Yeah, I think, first is really, you've got to know your consumer, right? You've got to know your market, right? And if your person isn't that price sensitive, right? I still see people buying shoes every day. We can't go anywhere. Like, why do we need shoes? But, there are amazing sales every day on MGemmy, and I keep seeing them posted like, I got another great pair of shoes, right? You're not going to wear those shoes anywhere for like 2 months, but it's an opportunity. So there are people who are buying. You just have to figure out, is that your customer who is buying? And, are they going to continue to buy? Do they feel that confidence? Right? If you don't have that customer who has that confidence, then what you were selling them was more of a vitamin than a painkiller, right? Is there a different way you can position what you're offering that feels like more of an immediate pain solution, right? Because it may have been the customer who came to you before isn't the customer now, but that doesn't mean there's no customer. So if you're offering something like, who is that solving for? Like, who has that pain now, and how many of them are there? And what amount of money do they have? Like, do they have jobs right now? Right? Do they have jobs that they can count on? So, that's part of like the companies that have done the work to know who their customer is can understand, like, this is how I think this person's going to be impacted. Right. But I also know that there's this other market we were thinking about getting into that's less impacted. Like, what would it take to get that up and running and kind of make that, I would call that a shift, not a pivot. Right? A lot of people say pivot, but you're still in the same business. Like, most people aren't going to radically change the business they're in. They're going to change how they sell and who they sell to, and maybe the messaging that they use around it. So to me, that's that baseline, right? Is who's your customer now? What does the year look like for them? Are they coming back to you? Where are they buying stuff? And if it's not where you expected or where you are, what are you going to do to fill that gap?
Absolutely. So, we talked about creating kind of like that future focus and having a bit of a roadmap, like a plan to get there. But what about businesses and brands that are really kind of vacillating between an ability to keep their businesses alive and not? Like we talked about, brands might be in a position right now where they're asking themselves, do I need to plan an exit strategy, or do I go all in? So what's your advisory around that for brands that might be, really kind of teetering on the scale between, we don't know if we're going to make it, and we're going to put all of it all in, and we're just going to go full throttle and see what happens on the other side?
Yeah. That's a hard one. And it's one that you really, like, your executive team or you as a CEO, if you're in a small business, only you can make that call. And I think that's one of the really hard things about being in leadership right now, is like, that is a call you have to make. And if you look out and say our next 6 to 12 months are this, and I just think our sustained outlook is this, and it's too much debt, right? We're never going to get out of it. So let's make the call. It's the right thing to do for our team. It's the right thing to do for our investors. Use the rest of the money to give people some personal runway. Like that's the right thing to do, right? That may be the right thing to do, right? For others, like the team will get together and say, we will find a way. We want this no matter what. And we're willing to take pay cuts. We're willing, you know, like if you can't pay me this for a year, that's okay. But like those are real conversations you have to have as a team. And if you don't have that kind of commitment of like, we're all like in the foxhole together and we're just going to do the work it takes to get to the other side of this and rebuild. Like if that's not the team that you have, you may be better off moving to an exit strategy because it's going to be hard for the next 6 months at least. So, you know, I do think it's realistic to just put all your options on the table. And if everyone says, I don't want that one, which is, you know, the exit strategy, then you've got to talk about why and what you're going to do to make it so that that doesn't happen.
No, absolutely. I guess my next question for you, I'm going to move us to this conversation around cash cuddling. I love this term when you brought it up. So tell us what cash cuddling is.
Sure. So cash cuddling is when you have a feeling of confidence about your business because you have money in the bank, but you're not doing anything with it, right? It's just sitting there. So rather than, you know, use it to pay some, you know, for some amount of innovation or some amount of investment, just like having the money in the bank is the right feeling, right? And right now there's even more of a tendency toward that of like, if I just leave the money in the bank, it's going to be okay. But then that also means like you're not doing anything to move forward. So there's a balance of like things that you have to spend on, right? One thing that I've seen, you know, in the last 2 weeks is like, if you didn't close your 2019 books, you're really struggling to, you know, access these stimulus programs and figure out, should you file your taxes and would you be getting money back and anything else like
Guilty.
you got to make money to close your books, right? And that's one of those of like, I'll just save that $300-400 until, you know, maybe the end of the quarter, right? I mean, there are things like that that are like they're just operating stuff that you have to do, and the bill will come due, and there will be a moment where you need that, and it's not there for you. So, you know, there are certain things of like, yeah, you feel good about the money in the bank, and you're discounting the importance of these other activities that you have to do in order to stay in business and understand your business and be relevant. So that to me is like, it's the balance, right? There's comfort of having the money in the bank, but you can't run up so many learning and business deficits that you just don't have a handle on your business anymore, right? Or you just don't have any inventory left to sell.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think we talked a little bit, like kind of going back to, you talked a little bit about team synergy, especially as executive leaders, and how this all relates to, you know, making decisions around your money and your investments, et cetera. But one other thing we chatted about was, you know, I think we agreed that the general sentiment within organizations was a sentiment of dissatisfaction with a lot of employees. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, you know, what's your advice for teams and decision makers and high-level contributors, despite things being uncertain? What should they be thinking about? What do you think that they really need to be considering as they move forward?
Well, in terms of teams, I mean, I would encourage you not to just stay in your job because, well, I don't know if I can get a different job, right? And that's part of having confidence in what you do and how marketable it is, and also knowing that like you've developed your network, and if you have to, you can consult, you can sell something on the side. But you know, if it's part of how you've run your personal financial life as well. So you know, I think the thing that we run into is like people just saying, well, I'm just going to sit here until like I'm desperately unhappy, but I don't see another alternative right now, so I'm just going to keep this job. Right? And people do this in good times and they do it in bad times, right? We're averse to change no matter when it happens and how hard we're pushed. So, you know, if you're truly unhappy being an employee or being in a job, like it's going to be painful no matter when you do it, right? So, you know, whether now is the right time to do that or another time, it's just about having the conversation with yourself of time boxing things of, I'm going to give this X much time, but I'm going to work on this other thing while I do it, whether it's like a side hustle or, you know, activating your network or figuring out like what's out there and, trying to update your resume because you haven't done it in 10 years. There are just all of these kind of steps that you have to take to get ready to make a change, whether you do it or not. And I think looking it in the face and saying, like, is this really an alternative for me? What would I need to do this? Right. And then if you're choosing your job, I think it starts to feel differently versus I have to be here and I don't have a choice. So, if you're going to stay in it, make it your choice to be in that job and do the best that you can, and get what you can out of it. But don't just, take on that negativity and be like, I don't have any choices right now. I have to do this and it sucks.
Absolutely, especially in a time now where like authenticity is a conversation we're having across the board, right? Whether it's marketing messages or how we speak, internally within organizations, we need to get really authentic with like our mission, our ethos, our values as organizations, and I think as individuals. So if you are making that consideration to make a move, what do you need to be thinking about in terms of like your core values on the other side of COVID? So I have a couple of clients in particular that had some questions for you.
Okay.
One of my clients had asked, as an emerging brand, how do we navigate looking for an investor in our space at this time?
There are plenty of investors who still have to spend money, especially those that have portfolios. They have obligations to make a certain amount of investment in a certain amount of time. So if you are looking for an investor, I would say, get honest about what your valuation is. Like, you have to have everything in order, right? Understand your books, understand your contracts, understand your cash flow, and then understand what kind of investor you want. There are certainly investors out there writing checks. So, start to look at where the deal flow is coming from, right? Who's actually investing right now, because they have an obligation to spend these funds, right? They have to invest. So, think about, looking forward, what's a realistic scenario for you? You're going to have to present 2 or 3 years expectations, pro formas of what you think the world will look like. Really think about, like, can you hit those numbers, right? Have you been way overly aggressive, right? Is it only a best case scenario? And, if you can still show good growth out of this, like, there are investors who are looking for companies, they understand there are opportunities out of this and like untapped markets and changes that, that the right company can make money from or make an audience from. So, there's not nothing happening right now, but you do have to make the case for why you think it's realistic that those numbers that you're presenting are things that you can hit and how you're going to do it despite the economic environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So another one of my clients, a brand founder, asked me, for bootstrap brands, what are some successful different low risk avenues or tools to gain sales and exposure right now?
Yes. I think especially like when you're self-funded, you're not just going to be able to buy a lot of ads to get yourself out of things. And I don't know if anybody's able to buy a lot of ads right now. If you can buy ads, it's a good time to buy them because nobody else can. But in terms of being self-funded, you're really you're always going to differentiate your business by having community, right? Having that base of fans who love what you do, they love what you stand for, right? And so the opportunity right now is like those people are sitting at home and they're out of TV and they're out of Netflix and tired of touring Ellen's house, right? They're looking for content, right? And what I've seen with some of my clients is they've just started, offering tutorials, right? Like, hey, you're at home, you can't run your business right now, or you can't go do this right now. Let's talk about when you can. Like, you should be better at this. Maybe we could practice that, right? We'll bring in some expert conversations. They're just, living to their brand values right now and kind of taking off some of the reg walls, just being more inviting to people who might want to be in that community in the future or are in that community, and really being of service to them and thinking of ways that they can create content right now or create togetherness that like makes people feel like there's continuity and they're moving forward and there's something on the other side. And if you have moments to do this, it doesn't take us, super long time. People are highly accepting right now of low quality, low fidelity content, right? No fancy editing, no anything. Like, you don't need any of that. So just grab your phone and start talking and start recording it and, start going on live or, sending it out to your clients. And your customers and just kind of sharing what you're thinking about. And that'll be really enough to start that conversation, then listen to what you get back and keep going.
Absolutely. So that leads us kind of our last question. What do you think that brands need to do to stand out and gain customer trust right now, or even in a month from now, or 6 months from now? What do you think that they should be really doing to create that certain level of engagement?
Yeah, well, one of them is live your values. If you already put something out there and said, we value this, and then you don't do it right now, like your people are gone. They are not coming back. And everything that
Absolutely.
I'm seeing right now is like people are making mental notes, whether they will actually change their bank and change their mobile provider and, change other things based on this, I don't know. But there are a lot of people making notes of this person in my community did this thing and I don't appreciate that and I won't be working with them in the future. So, if you have made a statement, you have to live by it to the best of your ability, and really, follow through on what you said you were going to do for your people, for your products, for your team, because that's the most, I think, critical thing in making it through this is that people will accept that like you were in a difficult circumstance and you tried your best and maybe you made a mistake. But if you were, truthful and open about like these are hard decisions and this is what I decided based on our values as a company, this is, what we can do right now, that will get you through to the other side. But, we're seeing too much right now of people who have presented a social agenda or, a certain culture around their employees. And the second things went wrong, all of that went out the window. And they're really just not living their values at all. So those companies are going to have a very hard time coming back because it's very hard to rebuild that trust.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Anything else you want to add for brands and businesses?
No, I think that's great. I mean, I have questions for you. And so I think as we get into that, I may be able to add on with that.
Okay, perfect. Let's do it.
Okay. So Melissa, my questions with you are a little bit more, I think, around apparel, retail, experience, kind of things for brands of that nature. So let's start with this one. Based on what you've seen in different size fashion brands over the last 10 years, how is the retail and online landscape going to change in the next few months?
Well, I mean, it's no secret that the retail landscape circa and post 2008 dramatically changed, right? We came off of the 90s and the 2000s where retail had its heyday. It was all about brick and mortar. Wholesale teams were abundant, building partnerships out there. And actually brands were able to dictate what the rules and regulations around retail and how consumers reacted to it. That no longer existed after and post 2008 recession. And so I've actually spent the past 10 years watching brands, a lot of legacy brands, struggle through the last 10 years, holding on to kind of some more older and antiquated ideals in terms of how to solve the new retail landscape challenges, but with old solutions, right? And so right now the conversations with thought leaders in the fashion industry and space has been around how do we take brands that have been kind of stuck in that traditional retail model, who didn't adopt digitally native platforms, who didn't get into omni-channel strategies, and how do we get them into the future? How do we also take digital to the next level? And what are we going to learn from all this, right? In terms of our consumer engagements, in terms of our conversions, how are we, to your earlier point, going to really create legacy customers and clients that will stick with us and create longevity? And I think, moreover, we're going to watch, the way consumer patterns, habits, and behaviors shift over the next maybe 6 months to a year. I mean, we no longer will be able to operate our fashion businesses as we once did. They are all going to look different. How they look different, I think it just depends on what your product strategies are. What did you do historically for your supply chain and distribution? What was your people strategy? Was it sustainable? And I think that we're going to talk more about products and the people and the processes around them in terms of innovation. Mm-hmm. We're going to have to create some new systems and start leaning in, I think, on platforms out there that maybe potentially weren't traditional, but are the future of fashion and the future of consumer support. Yeah,
I think that, what you're talking about, we've talked a lot about like sustainability in different factors, right? Like for me, it's about like, how do you set up your business with a growth plan, right? With a spending plan that lets you grow in a sustainable way, right? For the long term, not these wild ups and downs. And when we talk about sustainability for fashion, right? And for apparel, it's It's about like, how are we more sensitive to waste throughout our business, right? And responding to consumer need. So, to dovetail off of what you were just talking about, like we were already moving toward a more experiential approach to how we spend time and money. Does the trend toward experiential gain or lose given how hands-on it is in the last 12 to 18 months? And how really should we design experiences now? How should we think about the mall? How should we, think about how we shop?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's no secret that I think sustainability has been the hot topic. And, more than, I think the misnomer is that brands, well, one, there's not a lot of standardization around sustainability. And when I speak to sustainability, as we had before, I'm talking about a more holistic picture for your business, all encompassing, right? And it starts with your products. I think just one aspect of creating sustainable products is looking at the fabrications, but moreover, creating more closed loop systems, meaning, we saw the rise of resale, like The RealReal, by the way, who also, I was listening to a webinar this morning that they actually have a lot of vendor and B2B partnerships with brands and retailers out there. So they are becoming kind of another reseller for businesses. Additionally, we've also seen a lot of rental programs. Right? So people are kind of creating these closed loop systems like Rent the Runway. If you're not familiar with Newly, it's actually founded by Urban Outfitters, also another rental program available to consumers. And so I think there's kind of this shift happening in both sustainability and defining it in new ways, right? Sustainability means potentially creating less stuff, less inventory. And when I speak to brands, one of the first things we talk about, and I think it goes back to the 80-20 rule, right? Fundamentally, when it comes to your business strategy and your product strategies as it relates to your customers, you're going to have to I think brands really are going to have to think about creating more evergreen products, creating core programs that drive the majority of their businesses, and go back to what you were describing earlier, getting into I think the value systems of their core customers and creating more long-term relationships with them, meaning product shelf lives should be planned for 6 to 12 months. I don't think we're able to sustain, creating product lines that drop in every month and all this excess inventory that we end up going to discounting with. So I think we're going to create a couple different things in terms of brands, but I think moreover, the consumers are going to dictate that, right? The consumers are, by the way, online shopping is up, especially in certain categories. Children's has increased because mommies are home, daddies are home with their kids, and they need more stuff for the kids that they didn't have before. We saw like an uptick in electronics, which a lot of people now need earbuds and more headphones for their Zoom video conferences. And I think this consumer, I think to your earlier point, is going to demand more engagement in an experiential way, but it's going to be digital. There's a lot of the Shanghai and Shenzhen fashion weeks have been postponed, but and a lot of the wholesale markets, but now brands are getting savvy, and we're watching kind of China as this, and we can get to this later because I have some thoughts around that, but we were watching China kind of as this litmus test for the fashion industry because their life cycle is a little ahead of us. And, as those of us who are here in the Americas and Europe, and we're looking towards the future of re-emerging come summer, we're looking at like the success that China had and what did they experiment with that we need to be considering now, which means creating online experiences. LVMH hosted a Valentine's Day WeChat promotion where you got to speak to sales people live and you could order through them via digital channels. Same thing with wholesale. We're watching wholesale showrooms host their wholesale strategies live and promote their brands and engaging with our customers. And I was also listening this morning that like retailers, similarly, if you created experiential that required kind of this one-on-one engagement, maybe traditionally you'd have people into your boutique and you'd help sell more products. But I think now brands that got smart and got on Instagram and got on TikTok and started doing Instagram Live and potentially hosting maybe more thoughtful meditations or sound baths instead of just promoting products solely, that's the new experience. So being thoughtful of like the current climate and what's happening out there right now and being sensitive to that, but authentically speaking to your core customer through your products and through your messaging.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, going back to like, if you don't know who your customer is at this point and you don't have a really defined and dedicated base, this is going to be a hard time, right? Like you got to figure out how to get to that. But even with that base, we're going through a time where being at home, people have realized they need less stuff, right? People are already moving to less stuff, but like, I don't need Rent the Runway when I'm at home all day, right? So, as we live more at home and in private spaces and, realize we need less stuff, how do you think consumer purchasing is going to be impacted both over the next 6 to 12 months? And is this a permanent change of less buying?
Absolutely. Business of Fashion is predicting and forecasting that our decline is going to be approximately 35 to 40% retail decline over the next 6 to 12 months is the forecast. So we should plan for down businesses. We should be prepared to strategize around what we're going to be doing with those products, because people do need less stuff. Right now, people want to prioritize things that have high value to them, that potentially improve their quality of life while they are working from home, and making their life and work from home easier and more comfortable for themselves. I think in terms of creating less stuff, I would say the predictions that I've noticed most recently is that, I don't think consumers are going to go back to spending, not the way they used to. And I wonder, candidly, if we really should be just planning our businesses to be down 30 and 40% in the years to come. Like, we may not comp and grow year over year like we used to. And I think that's kind of really where was the downfall of the fashion industry to begin with, right? We overproduced, we overshot, we overinvested, and we didn't have a mitigation strategy. We didn't diversify our portfolios, even in terms of supply chain. We became heavily dependent on globalization to support ourselves. And when the globe shuts down and we're all working from home, we don't have access to those same resources. So I think realizing that, whatever we may need may be in close proxy, but also as brands and businesses, thinking about how do we start creating more sustainable practices for ourselves, for customers, realizing that they're probably going to buy less. They're not going anywhere. They're not, to your point, attending weddings, and they don't need a dress from Rent the Runway. But, and I will say, even the prediction is that the luxury market will be significantly down. So I don't think we're going to bounce back like we did after 2008. I think we should just plan for our businesses to be as healthy as they possibly can be in terms of profitability. That's the best strategy. And then start diversifying ourselves in terms of where will we get the revenue? And by the way, why are we creating these products for people?
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think one of the things that we have talked about before is, that brands that are built on 10, 12, 15% growth, the only thing they can do is buy other companies or sell you more stuff, right? And those kinds of growth rates that are appealing to investors, are appealing to banks, right? Those may not be real, but we are seeing investors who are interested in a sustained 5 to 7% growth, right? Or a quick growth, 2 years of faster growth, but then moving into a more sustained pattern, not infinity 25%, right? And that's one of the places where we've seen brands get themselves in trouble, because, you hit a certain point and, especially with some of the D2C brands that we've seen, they can all get to about $60 million, but then incrementally it costs so much money to make even $1 million more than that, right? Every amount more requires massive growth investment. So, is it okay for them to be a $60 million company? I'd be happy if I had a $60 million company, but your investor might not be so thrilled depending on their investor basis. But, just expecting that, like, that's what's really good, right? Like, only so many companies will become this size, right? And that, sustaining something at this level with a dedicated customer base is a really healthy business that you're happy to have for the long term, instead of pushing it into debt and continuing to try to grow at that pace, right? And doing things that are fundamentally unsustainable for your business at any size.
Yeah. How do you extend that bell curve for your brand and business, right? How do you create a longer bell curve for your brand so that, and potentially get ahead of future strategies in terms of there will be a decline. So what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit, because you talked about, there are a number of people who have reached out to you from a coaching perspective about being laid off. So for those who have been laid off or furloughed, when should they expect jobs to come back? And will those jobs be the ones they had before?
Yeah. I do a ton of career coaching, especially people in business who are transitioning out of what they've been doing for a long time, i.e. me, in my career, and realizing like there's something more I want to do. And I think the one thing I know is that change is inevitable. And I do predict that businesses won't look the same in the future. I think that we've been building these very like stacked hierarchies with people that have kind of these very siloed roles and responsibilities. And I think that we're, with the emergence of so many new brands and businesses and entrepreneurs, we are having to think like our own entrepreneur, right? We are a brand. We show up every single day as a brand in business. And one thing I'm predicting, especially for those who have been in sales organizations, I don't think sales organizations are going to be as robust. I think that a lot of organizations now that, one, they realize that people can work from home and they don't have to have so much overhead. I think they're going to ask people to do a little bit more. And I think that potentially we're going to see a lot of what were traditional employee roles moved into contractor roles, which I personally think is a really great thing. I think, again, back to diversifying your portfolio. If you're your own business owner, I'm the business of Melissa Anderson. I sell XYZ services. I'm a salesperson. I'm a wholesale strategist. I have these key retail partnerships. Why wouldn't you want to diversify yourself in terms of where you get your money from and not have to depend on one sole retailer, one sole brand, one sole vendor to make sure that you can get everything you need and want from your career? So I actually, as much as it sounds potentially scary to some employees, I think I really encourage you, as you've said earlier, to really start thinking about like, where was I in my career as it's been going, the industry I was in? Was I happy? Was I enjoying what I was doing? Was I growing? Or is this kind of a gift and an opportunity to take a step back and think about, how do I create the brand and business of myself that I want for the future? And now's as good a time as any to start planting those seeds. Reach out to your networks. We're sitting on LinkedIn all day, right? Start talking to people, having conversations that you potentially wouldn't have time, energy, or the potentially even the effort to go out and do, and start realizing that, you're as a brand, you are only as powerful as your networks and resources. So maybe start asking some questions and figuring out what your future might look like on your terms, versus waiting to see what the future might look like based on everyone else's terms.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I was talking to a business school class, and I know you're not supposed to tell people who are funded by large corporations not to go back to work, but it was interesting to talk to them and kind of share how automation, AI, other things will impact people at the executive level, right? And just change the nature of the structure of businesses, that it's not just gig workers who in the next 10 years are going to have to learn to be more nimble and work for themselves, or partially bring some of their income in, even if they have a job. That, it's a reasonable expectation for most people, right? 40% of people, that some of their money will come from self-employment in the next 10 years, right? And that's a big change. We're trained to be employees, like from day one, from elementary school. So it's a big mental shift and a lot of lift to get out of, especially if you've been working for 15 or 20 years and you're kind of institutionalized at a certain point of doing for the company versus doing for you.
Absolutely. So, and I had that conversation today as well. So, I think you just have to think about like, what is it you really want and how are you going to build it?
Right. Exactly. So I think we have time for one more. Why don't we take one from a client? A sustainable footwear brand owner asks, for brands that depend on manufacturing and inventory, do you predict that spring summer 21 inventory will be delayed or canceled based on production calendars?
Well, if you're familiar with the production life cycle as it exists, right now we'd technically be in product development and proto stages for what would be potentially resort, winter, and even pre-spring. So right now, if your factories have been shut down and your manufacturing facilities aren't able to make you sample lines, most likely you're not going to be able to get to market. This goes back to my initial conversation around starting to lean in on your core and evergreen product lines, because those might be the future of your business and brand, where you cannot create sustainability, seasonality and sustainability around the seasonality of building products season after season. So I've also read most recently, if you don't know now, those of you who are and children's wear, men's, that all of the summer shows have been delayed till September during the coterie markets. And then additionally, women's summer markets have already been canceled. So we're watching, you know, the Javits Center is literally a hospital right now, which is where traditionally all of us would go to sell our products on the East Coast. So, you know, I think we may need to be prepared that a lot of the traditional wholesale trade shows may not exist in the next 3 to 6 months. And I think from a product development standpoint, I don't foresee, unless you really got ahead of your production and or you make your samples here domestically, that you'll have that same opportunity to go to market. It may also kind of support the idea of like buy now, wear now, where, you know, buyers are going to potentially not put it open to buy on inventory lines in advance, and that we may need to get a little more nimble in season and just react to demand based on seasonality, what's happening now. What do the consumers need now more than ever? So, you know, I think between those two concepts, I think really plan for your future by getting really clear on what products you make really, really well, what make you stand out, and potentially sell more of those that have longer shelf lives for the next 6 to 12 months. And I think you'll probably see that, you know, your revenue generation is going to be maximized ultimately.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I could talk to you all day. Whenever we get on these, we kind of dovetail and just go for it. Yeah, but you know, thank you for encouraging us to do this and like just record our conversation that we've been having anyway. Yeah. And is there anything else that you wanted to add in the last couple minutes?
No, I don't think so. You know, I think really when it comes down to it, now more than ever, thinking outside of the box is so important. Start trying something new, start innovating with your team, start thinking about what you could do to kind of co-create the future that you're hoping to create for yourself, your business, your brand, in any transition that you might be making or considering. Start planting the seeds now, right? While we have the time. That's my piece of advice. And yeah, I think I'd love also to share that if you want to learn more about Boxtheoutside coaching and consulting, you can visit my website at boxtheoutside.com. I'm also on Instagram at boxtheoutside.
Yes. And my website is sifindustries.com. I have a weekly newsletter that I write about finance and operations topics for self-funded founders. And you can get that at, by going on the website, there's a pop-up to sign up for it. And I am also on Instagram and LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for your time today. This is great.
Thanks, Melissa. We'll talk soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.